Lisa McGrath, and I will be doing this webinar today on Idaho Core Standards Overview. We wanted to make sure that anyone who is presenting at an upcoming conference hosted by the Idaho State Department of Education and presenting on behalf of the Idaho State Department of Education has an overview of the new Idaho Core Standards, also known as the Common Core State Standards, and the current landscape in the state of Idaho when it comes to these standards. So let me just provide a brief overview of these standards and what is currently happening in the state of Idaho. Idaho adopted the Common Core State Standards as Idaho's new core standards in 2011. Like other states across the country, as you may have heard, we are facing some challenges with implementation. Not necessarily with implementation of the actual standards in the classroom. I think teachers are doing a fabulous job of taking these standards and developing lesson plans and actually teaching them. But we are actually facing challenges with some in the public questioning these standards and what they're meant for or what the goal of these standards are. So first, it's important to know that there is broad support for these standards and why they were adopted. From Idaho educators, Idaho Governor Butch Otter, Idaho State Superintendent Tom Luna, the legislature, the State Board of Education, Idaho's college and university presidents, Idaho Business for Education, which is our statewide organization of businesses across the state, and even the conservative Fordham Institute, which is a national organization that's very conservative, supports these standards. And many other organizations, many local school boards, local school districts have come out and support very vocally of these standards. So we do have broad support of these standards, that they are higher and very important. Where we're facing pushback comes from a vocal group of Idahoans who have questions mostly related to myths that have been perpetuated about the standards across the country. These are things that other states are hearing as well, states like Indiana, Georgia, Alabama, Utah. Those states, some of them have faced legislation to repeal the standards in the past year. No state has actually pulled out of the Common Core or chosen to repeal the Common Core, but they have faced a lot of pushback in their legislature as a result of some of these myths. It's important to know that none of the myths or the pushback has been related to the actual standards or what's in the standards. Rather, the questions have been related to, is this a federal takeover of education in some way? Is this a nationalized curriculum? Will these standards somehow be a leftist indoctrination or teach communism in some way? While some of these may seem outlandish to you or may not seem realistic because you have read the standards and you're familiar with the standards, they are real. Many Idahoans do believe some of these, and we must address them. So here are the things that we are working toward emphasizing anytime we go on the road and do presentations, whether it's in front of a group of educators or whether it's in front of a group of parents or business representatives. So first, we emphasize the reason why we move toward these new standards. The reason we move toward these new standards in Idaho is because we actually, in our K-12 system, do quite well academically. If you look at the nation's report card or any of those assessment indicators, you see that Idaho students do stack up quite well against their peers nationally. But where we struggle is in the number of students who go on to post-secondary education. We have about 47% of students who go on to post-secondary education nationally. That ranks us nearly last in the nation when it comes to our college-going rate. Of those who do choose to go on, we know that nearly half of them need remediation once we get there. That tells us that even among those who do choose to go on, we know that they're going on unprepared. And so while we do a great job in K-12 compared to our peers nationally, where our students are still graduating from high school unprepared for college, unprepared for community college or professional technical, and unprepared for the workforce. And so we know that that's a struggle and we have to do something about it. So Idaho chose to work with other states. Clearly, if our students are doing well compared to other states and still graduating unprepared, then Idaho's not alone in this challenge. So we decided to work with other states to solve this problem. Not only will we be able to realize economies of scale in working with other states by developing these common standards, but we also realize another benefit, which is for the first time ever, we'll be able to compare Idaho schools to schools and districts in other states. Right now, through the Nation's Report Card, or NAEP, we're able to compare state to state academically. How do a sample of Idaho students compare to a sample of Utah students or students in another state? But we've never been able to compare, how does Boise High School compare to a high school in Logan, Utah, or a high school in California. We would be able to do that through these new standards and see which high schools are pockets of success. If Boise High School is doing really well, what are they doing really well that we can share with other states? The second thing we like to emphasize is, the third thing we like to emphasize is the process. We follow the same process we have always followed in adopting academic standards in Idaho. The only difference is that we actually took more public input than we usually do during the process. So after the standards were published in 2010, each state had the opportunity to review the standards and choose whether or not to adopt them. In Idaho, we followed the same exact process. We follow every 5 years in adopting standards. We had Idaho teachers come in and review these standards. We held more than 20 regional public meetings. The state board reviewed the standards and held a public comment period, and then the state board voted to adopt the standards, and ultimately the legislature weighed in as well. Not every state followed the same process that Idaho followed. Every state has its own process, and ultimately not every state decided to adopt the standards. States like Virginia and Texas and Alaska have chosen not to adopt the standards. Some of them have chosen to come up with their own college and career ready standards separate from the Common Core, and others have chosen to keep their same standards in place. And so it's clear that this was a voluntary state-led effort because not every single state is involved and every state could follow its own process. Next, we like to emphasize what's not changing through the standards. When Idaho adopted these standards, we did just that. We adopted standards. We did not change any other policies related to data collection or curriculum or anything else. And so we like to emphasize the things that are not changing through the adoption of these standards. And I think that's important for anyone who's presenting at a conference to know in case you're ever faced with a question about what's changing. So first, we like to say and emphasize that state authority has not changed. Idaho still has control over its own standards. The federal government has never reviewed or approved Idaho standards in the past, and it has not reviewed or approved these standards. Second, local control is not changing. Local school districts still adopt curriculum at the local level. There is no national or even a statewide curriculum. Every school district is still responsible for adopting their own curriculum and their own curricular materials to meet their specific needs when it comes to meeting these standards. And so I think a lot of the questions you may receive as a presenter may come about curriculum and what's going to happen at the local level. That is still up to each local school board to decide. As a state, we are providing resources and examples of curriculum, of curricular materials, of lesson plans, but those are just that, examples, and they are in no way a statewide curriculum. The other thing that's not changing are standards in other subject areas. When Idaho adopted the Idaho Core Standards, they were just standards in mathematics and English language arts. They do include literacy standards for other subject areas such as science or social studies, but these do not change the content of other subject areas in science or history or anything else. They only emphasize literacy in those subject areas. So these standards in no way change the way a teacher would teach government or history or anything else. Now, we just reviewed some of the questions you may receive that we're receiving pushback on statewide that have nothing to do with the standards. But some people who are clearly in support of the standards, teachers, school administrators, and others, still have questions about the implementation of the standards, and rightfully so. Many of the questions we receive among educators have to do with professional development. They want to make sure that the necessary professional development and support will be there as they work to implement these standards. We couldn't agree more at the state level. So here's a look at the breakdown of professional development funding that will be provided from state funding as well as other resources over the next year. And I want to make sure that you're familiar with this just at a high level in case you receive questions about this. We have pushed this information out to school districts and to teachers, so they should be aware of it, but as you know, when you push information out, it doesn't always get to every single person. So here's a look of what's in the FY14 Public Schools budget, which kicks in this July 1st, and then also some other resources that are included as well. So the Idaho Core Standards PD line item is for $3.75 million. That's specifically for here at the State Department of Education for us to deliver PD to teachers across the state. Next is the Excellence in Teaching Awards. That's actually a total line item of money for differential pay, but up to $8.4 million can be spent locally on PD, including buying time. That's enough money for a district to buy 2 days of professional development for instructional staff in a district. And so that's critical for teachers to know that districts do have funding at the local level to buy time. In House Bill 65 that passed the legislative session just this past spring, there was $5.4 million that was shifted from the last public schools budget to this current public schools budget that can be distributed directly to school districts and will be distributed directly to school districts for a local district to spend on PD in whichever way they want at their discretion. Then there was a line item, which is called the JCAF line item, referring to the Albertsons Foundation. It's a matching fund for a grant that they gave us. $1.5 million of that money will be spent to continue a statewide contract we have with Discovery Education. Discovery Education is really popular with teachers, especially as they implement the new Idaho core standards to use in lesson plans and digital content and other things that they'll need when it comes to implementing these new higher standards. It also will be used in our continuing effort to develop examples of curricular materials and assessments in our statewide instructional management system known as SchoolNet. We already have about 250 lesson plans developed by master teachers that are aligned to the standards loaded into SchoolNet, and we have many assessment items as well aligned in SchoolNet as well that teachers can draw on, and this will be to develop many more for teachers to access. And then the Idaho Leads Project is not funded by the state. It's an independent project funded by the Albertsons Foundation out of Boise State University, and they have about $3 million over the next year to specifically assist select school districts in the implementation of the new core standards. So this totals nearly $22 million in funding that will be available just in the next year for professional development. Of that nearly $22 million, more than $13 million is flowing directly to school districts so that they will have it to buy time or to implement their own professional development at the local level. Another concern that we hear among educators is the transition to the new assessment. Educators are excited about what the new assessment will bring. We at the state level are very excited about what this new assessment will bring. You know, it'll have more than just multiple choice that we've had in the past. It'll have open-ended, complex problems. It'll have technology-based problems. It'll be a truly adaptive test that'll work to a student's ability and truly measure academic growth. And it will also not only provide just a year-end test that we've had through the ISAT, it'll also provide assessment tools that teachers can use throughout the school year to monitor students' progress, which is also exciting. But we know that teachers also want to know, how are we going to transition to this new assessment? The first time it will be given is in the spring of 2015, and we know that since these are higher standards, that the first time we measure students against these standards, not as many will score on grade level. So we are going to see a drop in scores. We know that. Teachers know that. We have to make sure that parents understand that too. And I think that's the concern among teachers, is they want to make sure that there's public awareness that that is going to occur. And we agree. So these are higher standards. It's going to take a few years for students to master them. And we have 2 years to prepare the public for this. We say it everywhere we go. This is a quote from Superintendent Luna that he gave to the legislature earlier this year, and it's similar to something he says everywhere he goes, every speech he makes, and we encourage school districts to repeat something similar in every presentation they give to their communities as well. It's not because students woke up one day and weren't as smart as they were the day before. These standards are higher. That's a good thing. It's a good thing for them and their future. And so we are working, and this is going to be a statewide effort so that in the spring of 2015, when these test scores come out, it won't be a surprise to anyone that scores were lower. We're using other statewide examples to help show what is going to happen. Kentucky is a good example. They already implemented higher academic standards and tested their students against these standards. They saw their percent of students scoring on grade level drop by about 1/3. Here's what it looked like in Kentucky in reading, and here's what it looks like in mathematics. and we show these charts everywhere we go and every presentation we make. And we also want to make sure and reassure teachers that we are, when these scores do drop, it will not negatively affect them when it comes to our statewide accountability system or teacher evaluations. Those conversations have begun, and we understand the concern that is out there today, and we will be working with the State Board of Education to take their concerns into account and make sure that we take the transition to the new assessment into account when it comes to evaluations as well as our new accountability system. So that is a basic overview of the Idaho core standards and the landscape we are facing today in Idaho. This is just a summary of why we are moving to the higher academic standards in mathematics and English language arts, that the effort was voluntary at the state level. It remains voluntary today, and Idaho could get out at any time we wanted to, but we still believe that this is the best path for Idaho students. These standards are higher. They will benefit every student and make sure every student graduates prepared for the world that awaits them. And just a simple review of the timeline, that teachers will begin teaching these higher standards in the fall of 2013. Many schools have already begun teaching to these new standards, and that students will be first measured against these higher standards in the spring of 2015. And so we just wanted to make sure that you were prepared with some of this basic information about some of the myths that are out there, some of the questions you may receive, and even some of the concerns you might hear from teachers and other educators as you present at an upcoming conference. We appreciate your participation and assistance in providing professional development to teachers across the state of Idaho. Professional development is one of the most important things we can do, especially right now as we're implementing these higher standards. We believe strongly that professional development cannot be a one-time thing year after year. It has to be ongoing and an ongoing effort, and we're working with the legislature to ensure that it is ongoing every single year and something that will be funded in the base and not just one time when there's money available. And so we appreciate your efforts to help us in providing this necessary professional development to Idaho teachers. If you have any further questions about the Idaho core standards, about our efforts when it comes to implementation, or about this presentation, please feel free to give me a call or to email me. Our information is on the website at www.sde.idaho.gov/site/ICS, or you can email me at mrmcgrath@sde.idaho.gov. Thank you so much for your time today and your efforts. We appreciate it.